ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Free Game Productions, Free Game. I'm here with Jeff Ebert and then Justin McClafferty, creators of 0 to 100. And then I'm just going to let them introduce themselves. And such an amazing experience we're going to get into. But
yeah, first off, so great to see you, Luke, and Danielle. Last time that we saw each other was probably 5 months ago, in February, 6 months ago, and having you guys back here on Long Island it felt like we picked up right where we left off. Going right into deep conversation, and it's the depth of the relationship. So my name is Justin McClafferty from Long Island, New York. Jeff and I have known each other probably for about 7-8 years now. Mm-hmm. Built a connection over common interest and alignment and common goals and, deep, meaningful connection and hard conversations, So I think that's kind of what, strengthened our bond.
Yeah. I'm Jeff Ebert from Manorville, New York. And, to start this, the biggest thing I think for us was just to open ourselves up to something different, right? Like, I think we all feel like a little stuck at some point, and like we don't know how to get out of it, And I wanted to like get out of this funk, to say the least, to get out of it, Mm-hmm. So just like anybody else, I needed something, so we decided to do this, But I think there's a lot more than just this, right?
So what this is just kind of I'm going to let Justin give an awesome overview. But what this is we met at Sauna Poppy in Harrison. Shout out to Built to Breathe, Sauna Poppy brands. They hosted a winter wonderland adult ice camp, sleepaway, whatever you want to call it. And honestly, shout out to, I like to think of it like the Godfather, Jesse Itzler, who introduced me to those guys. You guys met those guys through Jesse. And they hosted this amazing retreat. And the last thing they said at the end was like, take this torch and carry it with you. I remember Jeff saying, and we talked about this yesterday, I remember you being like your eyes lit up and you're like, we could do this back home. Mm-hmm. And then as Justin's been talking about, when Jeff says that, he just does that.
Oh, Jeff's a doer.
Yeah. If you say, okay, go ahead, I'm going to do it.
I think the sauna was ordered on the plane ride home before we got home.
I tried. The original one wasn't the one I wanted. So I was like, all right, we have to figure something else out.
So, Justin, you want to explain somebody that's coming to 0 to 100?
Yeah, great question. And then I absolutely want to acknowledge Sauna Poppy, Harrison Klein, Matt Arenz, and Jake Paterno and them for bringing us together and, giving us, the tools to carry on and bring it to New York, back home from Minnesota. But 0 to 100, the goal is to introduce people to practices that have changed Jeff and I's, both of our lives, when it comes to cold water therapy, sauna, breath work, and glass walking, and soon to be fire walking, things that have impact.
Which Jeff is licensed for, on a side note.
Yes, Jeff
we gotta get
a
still picture in, and we'll put that up there.
Yeah, and utilize these practices for a number of reasons. One, to understand and how to deal with life on life's terms. Right, we put people in what we call we put people in what we call voluntary stressful situations to learn how to manage their stress levels and how to navigate their mind. And when life on life's terms shows up, things happen in what we call involuntary stressful situations that they can use the tools that they learn, whether it's in the ice or holding the breath on empty lungs or getting ready to step on glass, to help navigate that. And what we found is, when it comes to people coming together, our goal is to build a community of people, and a space that is created through love, connection, and vulnerability. And what that does is allows people to find their authentic self, or if they're currently, or start their spiritual journey or internal work. Allow people to learn to accept who their authentic self is. I think a lot of the times that I say when we start these intros with our with everyone is we tend to bring our representatives for when we meet people.
I love that term. I learned that from them yesterday.
Yeah, and what that means is we bring the person who we think you're going to like and what you're going to accept. And in that moment, we're compensating our morals, our values, and our belief in order to be accepted. And, we want to create a space where people can feel loved, seen, and heard for who they are. And it takes time, it takes practice. There's always resistance there, and what we find is like through the breath work, right, like it takes us out of our mind and into our body, and allows us to feel these feelings. And encouraging people, what is also a beautiful thing that comes out of 0 to 100 with the community is you're utilizing community of people that help each other push past perceived limits. Outside of your comfort zone is the person that you ultimately want to become. And sometimes we can allow fear to get in the way of doing things that we want to do.
I would say all the time.
All the time. It paralyzes us. And sometimes we just need that support. So whether it's getting in the ice or getting vulnerable and sharing where you're at, what's on your heart, or, walking on glass. So, revealing their authentic self, building a community of people, introducing people, everyone to practices, I would say would be the core fundamentals of 0 to 100.
And then the science behind what going in the cold water, if people are familiar with it, you guys were explaining to me just the vagus nerve, to kind of paraphrase what I've now heard you say like a couple of times, is, never mind, I'm not going to do that. You explain it, because I'm going to explain it wrong.
So the biggest thing that we're doing with all these things, right? I mean, if you want to talk about the health benefits, like we're talking about, could be weight loss, could be lack of inflammation in the body, but most importantly, like the stress that we're putting our body under, we're training that, right? So that nerve that comes from our brain into all parts of our body to be like, no. Like you can see when people go into the ice sometimes when they're just like, their head just like, nope. And sometimes I have to be like, yes.
Right.
Like, yes. And like, we're training, and it really all builds from the breath to control that, right? So how do we control everything that we do, right? You find yourself locked in a thought and you're not breathing, right? So you got to breathe through it. So like, it's important while we're getting stressed under the vagus nerve, right, is to breathe through it. And you can manage it.
And you could train it like a muscle.
Yeah, I like that. So I think that's really important for everybody, is just voluntarily putting yourself in shitty situations, and then watching yourself rise through it. And then I don't remember who said it. I think one of you guys said it today, is the way you build your self-esteem is by doing what you say you're going to do.
Follow through with what you say you're going to do. Nothing crushes the soul more when you have an intention to do something and then not follow through. Like, I'm going to wake up and go to the gym at 5 a.m. and you sleep in.
Right.
But when you go up, there's so much empowerment. That, like you said, that's the way to build your self-esteem, is always following through what you say you're going to do.
We had a physicist on our podcast once, and he said the reason why things line up for me so much is because I'm coherent, and what he described as coherence, at least in like a living sense, is when what you say, do, and your thoughts are all aligned. And that's like when you get like the synchronicities, like the God winks, the God nods, whatever you want to call it. And then another, I think, great thing too is, Jeff, I think you said it today, is how you go into the ice or how you go into anything is how it receives you.
Yes.
And like, do you want to explain that?
So, like, one of the first people that took me into the ice, he says, his name was Lenny.
Yep.
And he guided me through like a quick breath thing. And then he's like, listen, how you go into the ice is how you will be received with the ice. And I was like, okay. So if you go into something calm, like the ice, and allow that to go in, you'll be calm while you're in there. And we've seen that with numerous people. Like, we've had one person, I turned my back for 1 second, and he started to go in already, but he went in because he wanted to do this masculine thing where I'm just going to muscle my way through this. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work because...
By some things, you just can't.
And you're bringing chaos into there, so you're going to be chaotic while you're in there. So he, you know, luckily enough at that point though, you can be brought back. Like if you start to calm down a little bit and work with your breath and actually trust people, you know, and like that's a big thing that we're trying to build here also is building a trust with people.
Yeah, and I think also too, like to paint a picture for everyone, like envision yourself. If you're, amping yourself up, getting ready to go into the ice, and like you jump into the ice fast, the water's moving. You may slip, you may lose your balance, right? Like we see people fall back, and then more anxiety, more fear, enters up, and that's just not the way to do it. Like you said, Lenny, a good friend of ours, has, like you said, goes into the ice and how you receive. If you go in calm, go in poise, and that's how the water will stay calm. So it allows you, and the goal is how are we handling stressful situations in real life, right? Like if you're in an argument with someone and you match them with yelling back, how does that, what is the end result of that, right? You yell back and forth, but if you match them with calmness and taking a few breaths prior to an argument, there's a very different reaction, and that's the hope of like, teaching everyone to, remain calm in stressful situations.
Well, if you're trying to get to a resolution, it's hard to yell at somebody that's being calm.
Right.
If you're not trying to get a resolution and you're just trying to heighten things, it could actually make you even madder. Like if somebody's just being, what are you being so calm for? Like,
Yeah.
But that also shows you the person like that you're interacting with. Okay, maybe I just don't want to interact with this person. And 50 Cent talks about it. He said, like he really learned to let things go because somebody cuts him off. If he wants to react, that person's getting in a car accident anyways today. He doesn't have to be the person that hit, right? And it's like it shows you if you can just calm yourself and be present. And then I'm thinking of, and I've gone into the ice several times. I mean, we met doing the ice thing. First time in a long time was yesterday. I jump in. I was in for a minute. I freaked out. Jumped out. It was you, and then Justin was like, "Hey, can I just help you with the breath?" And then it was like, "Oh yeah." And I know breath work, and I know all these things, but if you don't consciously think about it when you go in, it's just a different animal.
Yeah.
Your reaction to when you play the game.
You said something like being present, right? And like that's another thing that I think what makes this so important. It's like just being available to be present in the moment. Like it forces you, like the breath forces you to be in the moment. The ice forces you to be in the moment. And that sauna, when it's cranking like it was today, it's forcing you to be in the moment. And some thoughts will come through, but like it really brings you in. And I think, especially nowadays, we get lost in nonsense.
Yeah. And reacting to our initial thoughts based on emotion. Like how many times have we done something and 10 minutes later it's like, wow, I shouldn't have said that. All the time. I feel like, everybody can identify with that. And, not utilizing the emotion that feels so strong at the moment, maybe plausible yet untrue. Maybe you may have a right to feel that way, but not the reaction that you want to take. And when you want to get out the second you jump in the ice, or you want to breathe the second you're on a breath hold, is those thoughts are going to come, right? We're powerless over our thoughts, but our actions is what we have control over, and just letting it pass and not holding on to attachment or judgment or action in stressful situations.
And then what it does too is, I mean, I got to witness it today. Yesterday we spoke about it at great detail, but today Danielle and I got to be in the midst of it. Is you're now being the change you want to see in the world. So what's happening is every weekend you guys do this. You obviously strengthen your vagus nerve. Spiritually you get a little more enlightened, but then the community around you does, right? And then the ripple effects. Danielle and I talk about it all the time, especially in our church, in our ceremonies, mathematically it's proven with like the butterfly effect, but you don't know what you're doing here because everything is entangled, like scientifically proven, the way that happens. But what you can observably see is how the community that you're building changes. And then like you were talking about yesterday, your son sees you, and now he's 7.
Yeah, he's 7.
7-year-old is now doing breath work and doing cold plunges, like light years ahead of his peers, but he can bring that to his friends, which will then make a more enlightened group. And then things will either go one or two ways for him. Either everybody will get more enlightened, or he'll just be ahead of everybody. Either way, it's a win, right? And it's one of those things where, like, just by doing this and spreading this, it's beautiful, right? And you can see how grateful the people are that we're here. Like, how has that been? What kind of impact has that had on you guys?
So it's interesting because, like, it's this play on this masculine and feminine energy that we have going on. And it's interesting to navigate that, right? It's really cool to watch people, like, fully come here, like, not knowing. A lot of people, like, there was people today that I've never met before, right?
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, the one girl, Janine, I've never met her before.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's pretty common that we get people that randomly hit us up on social media from
they're
people's
friends.
other posts, friends and
that's
friends.
cool.
So, like, coming here and experiencing, and, like, today was a special day. Like, you guys are here, like, you brought the sound healing and everything too, and we did glass walking, which was the first time we did that for everybody. But I think it doesn't, when we were talking about this before, it doesn't really hit me, you know? Like, I'm so in it, and I'm like, well, it's not perfect, right? But what is perfect in this sense? Like, that's just my own stuff. Like, this unrealistic expectation of perfectionism, you know?
And it's funny you say that, because that's where the imposter syndrome comes on. Because in the moment I feel alive, right? I'm just like, wow, look, like, this person didn't think they can do it. And, you know, being of service to others and impacting others, I think, you know, is one of the reasons why we got into it. And as Jeff mentioned, like, the perfectionism, like, oh, is
Because
this
they're obviously not doing it for the money.
No, of course
Obviously
not.
not.
Yeah, of course not. You know, my girlfriend taught me imperfect action and kind of just, like, figuring it out, you know, and as you go. And I think that's why we partner so well together is, you know, I can envision of, like, excitement, but, like, my imposter syndrome or negative self-talk or limited beliefs will hold me back. And Jeff's like, no, let's just do it. And I need that in my life. And watching other people have those same conversations with getting to the ice, like, it's a beautiful thing, you know?
It's important in our relationship too, because, like, I struggle with that femininity side of things. Like I was telling you, like, we do a guided meditation before we get into the Wim Hof breathing, right? And today the topic was, like, bringing awareness to yourself, right? And to loving yourself. And I feel uncomfortable saying some of these things, like being in touch with your body, right? Listen to, like, what is a quality of yourself that you like?
I like that. That was interesting. I've
You
never
know,
heard that.
and I struggle with that, but I know I'm safe enough that I can bounce it off of him, right? And he'll be like, why? Right? And then we reflect on it, and it's because, like, I have a struggle talking to myself like that, right? So, like, it just tells me that, like, I need to continue to do this work to get to this level.
Right.
You know, and keeping myself in the safe space. Like, I would share that with other people. Obviously, I've shared it with you, you know. So, like, there's a big part of me that wants to continue to work, right?
And I think that's super important, especially with what's happening nowadays, right? Particularly in Western society, these concepts of right or wrong. It's a very binary, I guess pun intended, right? But, like, it's a very binary, like, society where, like, debate class is taught to win or lose. And it's not taught to come to a more complete understanding. And then I think by masculine guys not being afraid to show feminine aspects and still being masculine dudes, I think that's a huge healing thing for society. Or feminine women not being afraid to push themselves, because in my opinion, although you basically have to surrender once you're in the ice, that's a masculine aspect. It's just jumping in the ice or just going in a sauna. Like, that to me is a more masculine. Once you're in it, you have to basically just sit down and surrender, but the actual attempt of doing it. And then just kind of one more thing to touch on, especially because we've spoken about perfectionism now for the last 2 days a lot. The etymology of perfection or perfect, we've changed it in modern society to be without flaw, but it used to be just complete. So perfect just meant something was complete, and now we've added the without flaw, which is not realistic. I don't want to say the name of the movie because the name of the movie basically ruins the movie. But there's this movie, and this guy's getting ready to go do this insane mission. He's about to go kill Hitler, right? And he has this Russian spy who's giving him a shave. And the Russian spy says, if I cut you when I'm shaving, you'll complete your mission and you'll live. But if I do a perfect shave and I don't cut you, you're going to fail and die, because nothing is perfect but God. And I was like, oh, that's good. And he says a shave is just a shave until you ask for signs or omens. And this will no longer be a shave. And he goes, but if I purposely cut you, we each get 7 years of bad luck. So he shaves him and then does a perfect shave. So he cuts the guy on purpose. And then like, you know, the kind of movie goes off. But I just think that that's an interesting thing, especially like as you guys are going, that might be able to offer is just, there is no such thing as flawless. I don't think there's anything in the universe. I know NASA tried to make a perfect ball and they couldn't make one without at least some kind of indents. Like there's like nothing that's perfect or without quote unquote a flaw. Have you seen, I have to imagine you've seen a lot of people embrace their flaws here, or like have you seen a bunch of like breakthroughs?
Yeah, I think, you know, a couple aspects to unpack there. You know, one is seeing when, you know, I always say the two most powerful words that bond people is me too, you know, and when you see someone get vulnerable and share, and then someone can identify with that and realize like what they're holding on to, like chances are we've been through it. Like, you know, Jeff and I are in a 12-step program. We're in recovery, and you know, they say what grows in the dark dies in the light of exposure, you know, and watching people not hold on to that is beautiful, you know, and kind of backtracking to what you said earlier, want to touch upon was the masculine and feminine energy. Like we have both of that. Every person has both of those polarities in us, and for us, you know, for me, like I'm an ultra runner. I do triathlons. Like you know, I can be involved in a gym, and it's like, listen, like I can embrace that masculine energy, but you know, what I also can do is be in touch with my feelings, be in touch with my emotions, and embrace the feminine energy. And what I realize is when we do things like this, like the breath work, vulnerable sharing, when I can tap into that feminine, it actually allows me to tap into that masculine energy even more, right? And there's this phrase,
Right.
yeah, and there's this phrase that, like, you know, I would love to make vulnerability alpha, you know, like, because like you going back to, you said like the stereotypes of a vulnerable man is weak, right? And you know, is actually, there's a lot of strength in that, you know, and a lot of now I know I'm kind of answering two questions at once, but that's kind of what came up for me during that like, you know, I'm training for a 100-mile race right now, ran 50. I can run 100 miles, but also at the same time identify like why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling, or what are my triggers, you know, and what are my insecurities, and share that openly with you with confidence, you know.
So, I mean, you kind of answered it with that, but like, how would you say you've evolved with this, or would you say you've evolved?
Yeah, I think it's just giving a lot of reassurance that I'm on the right path, you know, and you know, even calling out, like if I'm anxious, typically I get super anxious right before, because going back to the perfectionism, I want it to be perfect. You know, I want the flowers to look right, and I want this to look right, and just letting people know where I'm at, like, you know, I'm nervous, you know, and just letting people see me and not needing to put on the persona like I've got it all together. You know, I think as a society we try to. I think it's allowed me to feel safer sharing things, because there's always resistance, right? Just because you could get vulnerable and you have the ability, it's like a muscle. Like there's always resistance out of fear of judgment. But I think it's helped me with that pattern of just raw communication. You know, that's how we build our relationship, right? Like
Right.
at ice camp, you know, getting vulnerable and raw.
Right. So when these guys walked into the ice camp, Danielle and I were the first two there, and right when we got there, you know, we go say what's up. I'm talking to Sauna Poppy, and I'm talking about these future partnerships, and an eagle lands 20 feet from us. I'm like, oh my God. So for us, it was like, yo, we're supposed to be here. That's in Sauna Poppy. Still talks about the eagle. It's like, oh, that's a sign. Then you guys walk in, and we're having this crazy conversation. And I remember who, but one of you guys, it might have been your brother even, but you guys were just like, all right, we're supposed to be here. And it's like, I have to imagine since you've started this, you've gotten more breadcrumbs or more synchronicities. Like, please keep doing the work. Like,
I just got chills thinking about that. Yeah, because it's all started like this was. It's been like just the breadcrumbs just rolling up, and it's just become more and more because we did Wim Hof class, and Chris Harrington guided us through some Wim stuff, and then we were like, oh, we want more, and then we did ice camp, right? And you know, we wrote down in journals and stuff like that, and during the Wim class though, I had like this epiphany while doing the breath work, and I was like, I just feel like we're supposed to do something together. Like, I just feel like we're supposed to do something. And we do the ice camp, and I'm like, yo, I could bring this. I could do this. I want to do this. And then Jake
Peranto, like Toronto. I love that too.
So he was trying to do this group, like a man, I guess, accountability group, right? And one of those things was like, what is your 1 year goal? And at that time, like I tore my ACL and everything, and I just wanted to like run 10 miles with him in his 100-miler. And I was like, reflecting after they went over, I was like, that's not good enough. And I was like, I want to do this. I was like, I want to build this business. I want to do this, and I want to make this vulnerability alpha, right? You know, I wanted to incorporate these things.
When we say Jeff's a doer, that was like 4 months ago, guys.
Yeah.
Like I say,
he gets things done, like, because like we talked about, I'll slow play things, like, yeah, this is great, but I'll get to it, you know, out of fear of failing, you know. And Jeff does.
You know what it is? My mind doesn't stop, right? And honestly, when we do these things, that's the only time my mind stops.
Yeah.
And that was a big thing for me when I started doing the ice, was just to get that clarity to stop the thoughts, you know. But really, like, if you tell me, you give me an idea, I'll figure it out. That's like anything in life. Like, you know, build an ice tub, right, that cools itself or makes ice. Like, all right, I'll figure it out. Like, that's just how I am. And I think that's part of my masculine, like, just I'm a problem solver, right?
And that's the beauty, right, is not losing the masculine, just learning how to take and incorporate the feminine.
Correct.
It's interesting.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. So it's interesting you say, like, this masculine, like, in past relationships, I would come off as emotionally cold, I was told.
And Danielle, I'm sure, is nodding because she hosts women's groups, and so many women are like, I wish my man knew how to, like, connect, da 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 da. And so we're gonna take a bunch of the ideas, and we're gonna, you know, pay homage and do our part to bring this on top of what we're doing in Georgia. Because by doing these things, I think this is the way, not the only way, but the way most men can learn, because there's masculine aspects, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's why, like, explaining, like, the vagus nerve and the science behind things, you'll attract more masculine men, because there's an empirical evidence that, like,
there's sports performance stuff in this. It's that, like, if that's how you want to get in, like, 100%, all of this stuff can enhance your sports performance. Breath work, running will help your lung capacity, right? The ice bath, lower inflammation, right? Sauna will help lower inflammation, increase blood flow. All of these things, push nutrients to all of it. Like, athletes have been doing these things for a long time.
Right. Like, I remember Ray Lewis was famous for, like, being in the ice bath. Like, all the NFL players just talk about how long he'd sit in there, but nobody knew the benefits. It was just like he was a badass that would sit in the ice thing forever.
It's funny because that's how I started. Right, was I was training for a half Ironman, a 70.3 mile swim, bike, run, and it was during COVID. And Jesse Itzler, shout out to Jesse, hosted this program in
We all love you, Jesse.
Yeah, hosted this program in July 2020. It was the 30 Days of Excellence program, and he brought Wim Hof on, and I just became instantly fascinated through it, and bought his book, The Wim Hof Method. And initially, I just started just doing it to recover my legs, because I was working out in the gym, I was swimming, I was biking, I was running, I was boxing at the time, and and so much more came out of it. So I love that you said that, is like just bringing, you know, that sports performance to do that. And eventually, like, our goal is to host men's sessions where there's a little bit more of a primal fighting to it and a little bit more of a respect level that could bring that energy to our experience, because our goal is to create the retreat experience for people in a couple hours.
And I think you keep the fighting, like the kendo with the women, because they actually, I feel like, almost enjoy that more than the men, because they don't get to be competitive. And I think you could attract men with the scientific explanations, and that will get them. And then what they'll actually like will be being able to like secretly open their feminine side, right? Because the concept of writing down what you want to release and then burning it in like the fire, I've never seen it other than like Danielle, like in like her witchy friends doing doing that stuff. And I was like, oh shit, like, but I think you do that, hey, you know, this is a metaphor, but it also, your brain connects with it, and now you're releasing it. And so fire in like plant medicine world is grandfather spirit, but also our ayahuasca taita has taught us that fire represents heaven and cold represents hell, because fire is the transformation and it's warmth and it's you're with like that's how you get to the next level, and cold is the isolation. So like for whatever reason it got changed and mistranslated, but fire was like the warmth and all these different things. So like when you release it, my guess on that would be energy's never like, can never be getting rid of, but it can be transformed, right? So like whatever you're releasing will be transformed ideally to like its higher self. As George wants to get in. That's just a suggestion. But either way, what you guys are doing is absolutely amazing. And we kind of touched on it, but like, what's your ultimate goal on what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, and I think just kind of echoing the retreat experience in, you know, a few hours, because most people, you know, I'll say this, going on retreats, there's a feeling that you get, like a natural high, that like you're there, and the connection, and when you're leaving, and that you can bring with you into your life. And you know, sometimes it's you can't take a full weekend, right? People have children, people have jobs, they can't afford to travel, you know, to Costa Rica or Mexico or even across the United States, right? And so our goal is to create that experience for people for a couple hours on a weekend, take a Sunday out and reset. And then ultimately we'd love to host, you know, like maybe some sort of weekend or, you know, 6 half-day kind of retreat, and incorporate, you know, like Jeff is certified in guiding people on walking on fire and incorporating that, and, you know, like a farm-to-table food experience, and, you know, yoga and things like that.
Yep. As you were saying that, like an image flashed across my mind. And I primarily think in words, so like whenever I see an image, like it's profound to me. But I was picturing my buddies in like upstate New York. And what you guys are doing, right, is Danielle and I bring this back with us to Georgia. But all these different people making like weekend retreats, because the issue with sometimes people can't afford like the big retreats. But if you make this like a weekend retreat, and all these different people do this, right, and ideally anybody that's listening, I would say come and visit these guys and see what they're doing. But people being those flame carriers, or torch bearers, whatever you want to call it, in their different areas, and all these different areas having these like little retreat houses. I mean, it's church. It's in the Bible. It's 2 or more gathered in my name, right? Like, and you guys are saying like, you know, you want to make vulnerable alpha. So the Greek, are you guys familiar with, most people aren't, but are you guys familiar with the Greek goddess Psyche? Okay, so it's interesting. We associate, what do you guys associate Psyche with?
Your mind.
Your mind, right?
Yeah.
It's actually, she's the goddess of the soul. But the soul, it was the soul and the mind. And she starts off not as a goddess. And my concept on that is like, so when you guys are letting people connect to their authentic selves, I think the reason why there's so much mental health crisis in this country is people are cut off from their authentic selves, or AKA their soul, right? And allowing people, because, and I think that's where this trans movement's happening, there's been this cut off, it's A or B, versus like you can be primarily A with a bit of B, right? Or primarily B with a bit of A, like with whatever. But it's the concept of the Greek goddess Psyche. She starts off and she's immortal, and she's a princess, and she's more beautiful than Aphrodite. So Aphrodite gets jealous, sends her son Eros, who's the god of love in Rome, it's like Cupid, to kill her. He can't because she's too beautiful. So he hides her in this cave, and he makes this cave more beautiful than any kingdom ever. And he feeds her and gives her all these things, but like the rule is she has to be blindfolded because she can't see. So Eros feels bad for her because she's all alone, and he brings her sisters to her. And her sisters are like, what kind of monster hides themselves? This guy's probably a freak. It's a monster. It's somebody terrible. You need to get away from this, da 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 da. So she pretends she falls asleep one night and then takes her mask off and sees the man she loves, and it's Eros, the most beautiful man ever. And she's like, oh my God, this is incredible. Eros runs away. Aphrodite, and then Psyche chases Eros. Aphrodite finds out that she's not dead and is furious and sets up these 3 impossible tasks for her to do. One of them is like has to separate these things of wheat and find like these impossible separate things of wheat, and these ants come and she's like nice to them and the ants separate it for her. And then the next is I don't remember the exact thing, but it's like one of them has to do with like has to get like the golden fleece from the ram that like Jason got, and she can't get to it, so some other animal helps her and gets it. And then the third one, she has to go to the underworld and get back this box. And when she does, she like looks in and falls asleep. And then Eros goes and pleads and brings her back with love. And then Zeus is so impressed that he allows her to become a goddess. But like, if you really break down what does that archetype of that story mean, it's the goddess of love will get jealous of our souls because of how beautiful it is, right? So it's been forced to hide in a cavern. But by following the breadcrumbs of the signs and allowing things to just happen and do it, then we end up becoming united with the god of love or the goddess of love or whatever. And I think what you guys are doing is you're unlocking people's psyches. And I mean that's also why psychedelics are psychedelics, because it's a soul plant. It's the mind, but it's like the connection. And I think what we've done in modern society, due to whatever reasons, medications and hormones and food and stuff, and then also categorizing things, I think we've cut people off from like expressing or exploring their true selves. And I think what you guys have created in 0 to 100 is an opportunity for people to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes complete sense.
Yeah.
It's so I mean, and that's kind of like one of the things you guys are trying to do. How did you get to this place of doing that?
I think, recovery has a big part to that. So like that self-help, self-development. In reality, like we're not doing it alone. A lot of that stuff, and knowing that, we have help if we want it. So like we always had this vulnerability between each other. And I think it's funny because we talked about it yesterday. We lost that in a sense, and like I was training for a bodybuilding competition, and he was my support on that. And we just met, right? And and it's like cultivated from that point, and we were both doing well, making like a decent amount of money, and I feel like we put that as a priority.
Money, property, prestige.
Yeah, and that's usually the downfall of everything. And we put all that stuff before personal development and anything, thinking that because I'm making well into 6 figures, or we can afford these things and do these extravagant trips that do nothing but just fill this fake void.
External solution for an internal problem.
When all that stuff came crashing down, we were lost.
Yeah, COVID hit us hard.
Yeah.
It hit me, both us financially, and we were left with a hole. And it's funny because that's when I started my, I would say, second personal development journey. Because the first one is when, I was actively using and couldn't get clean and ended up homeless, panhandling for money, and in rehab 9 times and hitting that bottom, and then getting clean, like Jeff said, getting life together, ego coming, and then thinking I'm somebody, buying $500 Burberry shirts and Ferragamo shoes, and then COVID hit, and I'm like, wow, I can't afford this, and I was barely surviving at the time, and realizing that like there was that internal void that looking to fill. And I think as we've had that foundation of personal development, it just led that we added things like this to complement what we're doing in our 12-step fellowship. And I love what you said, like, follow the breadcrumbs. And that's something that I got from you at Ice Camp. And I think that's been the biggest driver in continuing what we're doing, because we get little moments of reassurance that like we're on the right path. Like, for example, we were at the Ice Camp, and I was at a very transitional time in my life, and there's always that resistance of not knowing what you're walking into. And I think we got there, and within 5 minutes we were diving into childhood trauma. we were having deep connections, and like at that moment I was like, I'm home. These are my people, like, I don't care what you do for work. Like, doing whatever you do for work doesn't define you as a human, right? And I want to know who you are as a human. And, little moments like that is like, okay, this is my tribe, and following moments like that, or,
It's interesting because at that moment at that Ice Camp, both of us financially shouldn't have been doing
shouldn't
that.
have been there. Yeah.
I didn't work for 6 months because I hurt my knee and everything.
Oh, no shit.
Yeah, so both of us were like, probably shouldn't do this, but like we felt like we needed something, and you say it all the time, like an ego death, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think we both needed that to really humble ourselves. I needed to be humbled, and I was lucky enough to have a foundation to fall back on, so like it didn't destroy me.
And that's what I think you guys are doing is so important, is you're giving people a foundation. Because there's a pendulum to life. Like, no matter how prepared, no matter how good life is, there's going to be something that happens that makes it hard. So you guys, I mean, that's beautiful. So like, basically you guys had that foundation. You jumped in when you guys technically shouldn't have. But the difference is, for anybody that's thinking about doing things like this, is all I can say is you'll almost never, I mean, unless it's blood money, like you'll almost never regret investing on your personal growth. And that like gives you tools as something that you can hold on to, right? You might regret going out and getting beers with the boys if you're strapped, because you probably aren't going to gain something unless you get that one time you meet that guy that you needed to meet or something. But you can't bank on that. But if you go to something like this, you're like, I'm going to learn some skills. And I think what you guys are doing is great too. You're doing very similar to the way, Built to Breathe, Sauna Poppy, Jake, Matt. I love the way they put it together. It was a very structured. We're teaching you, this is how we want you to do it. I'm going to take a walk, silence, things like that. And I think what you guys are doing is absolutely amazing. Something that Justin asked people, and he mentioned it yesterday, I absolutely love it. You want to say the question you said you asked people?
Yeah, so like one of my favorite questions I've learned to, going back to, when you meet someone, what's the first question? People usually like, what do you do for work, right? And it's like, that doesn't define me, man. Like, and I think we've put this stigma on what you do for work defines who you are as a person, and one of the things, like, talking about, and I'll backtrack a second before answering that question, is learning to embrace my authentic self, start that Ice Camp and continues on that journey. And who I am as a person is I like deep, vulnerable, meaningful connections in what you're going through. And, so now, for the most part, when I meet someone, the first thing I ask them is what are you passionate about? Right. And when you ask that question versus what do you do for work or where you're from, there is a very different conversation, right? Like their spirit rises, their tonality changes, they get excited about it, and it just changes the dynamic of the depth or it changed the dynamic of the start of the foundation of that relationship. And it's important too, because on the other end of the spectrum, I'll probably say that most people have never been asked that question.
That's what I was going to ask. Two different things pop in mind. One, what Jeff said, how you enter the ice is how it receives you. Mm-hmm. If you enter meeting somebody with what are you passionate about, they must receive you so differently than everybody else at that coffee or table or whatever.
And I'll even frame it with because people aren't expecting that, right? So I always will say listen, I'm gonna ask you the first question I ask everybody when I first meet them, and it's almost that frame of creating that okay, something different's coming, and then and when they don't know,
it's a good frame.
Yeah, and it's just when they don't know, it's oh, I don't know, but making them feel safe. And that's what we like to do, is we want to make people feel safe regardless. So it's oh, it's okay. Listen, I've been there. I didn't know what I didn't was passionate about, and then that makes them feel a little bit more safe in an insecure potential thing. And I think a lot of what we do here is how we frame things, right? And, for example, when we start out, we always start out with acknowledging their courage that it took for them to sit and get ready to jump into the ice, right? Because there's always resistance there. And Jeff lives pretty far out in Long Island, so it's a good drive for most people. So there's a lot of opportunity for people to create plausible yet untrue reasons to not follow through with what their intention is, and setting that frame of acknowledging that encouragement and setting that frame to them where it's listen, is anybody feeling resistant? I feel resistant. I've done this. Jumped in the ice over hundreds of times, and I think
it never gets easier.
Never gets easier. The resistance is always there. Going back to my buddy Lenny, he always says you got to recertify every time. And, I think it's important to answer this question in probably a long way. It's important to frame things. The way you frame things creates safety. In how you say it, the tonality of say it, what you say, and I think that's what's important, and what we offer that experience is whether it's asking different questions that people aren't used to asking, or diving deeper into saying something, because most of the time when people talk, they are waiting for you to end to talk about themselves, or sometimes they'll instead of diving deeper, right? So I think that's super important.
I have my own view on it, but I'm curious on your guys' view. Why do you think it is that you could say something that's 100% accurate, and maybe we'll say 100% accurate and helpful and necessary, but if you don't frame it the right way, not only will people not receive it, but they'll want to kill you or whatever. Why do you think that is? That's human nature. Yeah. It's undeniably.
I guess I would need a little more context, because it depends on this. I feel like it's the space, how they identify me, I think that's why important how our delivery in the beginning. Usually a lot of these people know us already. So a lot of times I'll divulge that I'm in recovery. I don't always do that, because there's still that perception of I was a junkie, right? And I stole from people and I hurt those close to me. And then, so I'll share that, but I also go into I was at a really low point in my life not too long ago, and I'll say that I still struggle with those things now, right? I'll instantly bring in this deep, letting that I'm raw, and I think if I give that 100% accurate information by divulging some stuff about myself, it'll be a little more open. If you don't know me, and I'm well, this is how this goes, and that's how that goes. Right. And you're well, what is it? What does your opinion matter or anything? Because you think it's just an opinion, even though you could fact check it. But who are you?
Yeah, leading through action, and I think it's a really good question. I've been trying to reflect on it, and I'm sure a different answer would come up as I process it further. But I think, like Jeff said, the space that you're in, but I think it comes into ego, right? And, them thinking I don't, telling me what to do. And also sometimes the messenger blurs the message, right? It could be coming from the person that you don't like, know? Yes. I think it's important to, when you have a conversation with someone, acknowledgement, my girlfriend and I were watching this coaching call, acknowledgement and appreciation prior to saying something that's hard, right? And that could be in like an argument or anything, is it releases the tension and the resistance, So I don't know. I'm sure I'm probably going to sit in my car. I'm like, damn, I should have said that for that answer. But that's what initially came up for me, as I think.
I like to think of the podcast as like ceremony. Like whatever happens is supposed to happen.
Yeah. There's my perfection. Like, I should have said the right thing at the right time, right?
But whatever you said was the right thing. And the reason I asked that question is I think I've gotten dramatically better at it. But in the past, especially ironically now, because I'm like everything I do is like based off intuition and like feeling, but I came from a hyper like black and white school of thought, like very logic, and in the ayahuasca ceremony it was like, Luke, even though you always speak truth, because like at 21 it was like I can never lie again, and like I always have to be honest, if you don't follow proper protocols and you don't respect like the guidelines, you're a fucking monster. And I was just like, oh like oh, okay, well, I'm trying to help. And it was like, doesn't matter, the way you do it won't be received. And the reason why I like have a podcast called Out of the Cave is my first college, I think it was my first college class, it was definitely in my first week of college. It was a philosophy, and it was Plato's allegory of the cave. Are you guys familiar with that?
No, I'm not.
So I absolutely love it. So it's like what I call Out of the Cave. But it's supposed to be like Socrates' whole thing, justice, and in it they go into this allegory of the cave, and the concept of it is modern Western world. And in it, people they think they're tied to a stake, and they're looking at shadows on a wall. For the listeners, I explain this probably every podcast, but whatever. You guys are going to have to listen to it again. So they're looking at shadows on the wall, and then the first person gets off, and he sees the fire. Oh my God, he gets terrified and goes back to the stake. The next person gets off, sees the fire, looks up again, and sees the puppet master behind it making the shadows. Gets terrified and runs back. The third person gets by the fire, the puppet master runs out, gets out of the cave, and is like, oh my God, there's a whole world out here. I can't wait to go show these people. And he brings fire back into the cave and shows people to the stake, and it hurts their eyes, so they get off the stake and kill him. And like that's like the concept of what happened to Socrates, Jesus, all these different people that are trying to force truth upon others, and it's not received, and usually they end up getting assassinated or things like that. And it goes to tie back into Jesus, like, don't throw pearls before swine, lest they trample them and throw them back at you. But it's interesting. So that's like one way, like the esoteric is like you don't share everything with everyone who's not ready for them. But also how you share it could be a huge thing too. That oftentimes
it's funny you say that. We try to go the route of attraction, not promotion, because when you're super excited about something and you're like, I have this feeling, you need to have this feeling, and X, Y, and Z, this is why you should do it, right? And
even with best of intentions. Right.
Even when people reach out to us on social media, I think there's a going back and tying it even more together, the frame of, there's curiosity there for a while. I mean, I feel like it's always the first thing, like, this is fucking crazy, like you're jumping in ice or you're walking on glass, and then consistency creates curiosities. Wow, these people are still doing it. I'm seeing more people do it, and then there's something in them that sparks curiosity to action, right? And when someone reaches out to us, right, like, first thing I'll do is I'll acknowledge them, like, hey, listen, I want to acknowledge your courage takes just to reach out,
I mean, that's great.
Yeah. And like, it's learning to fan that flame of desire. And I think with something as outside the box as some of the things that we're doing, right, it's important to nurture that, because it's like, you can't respond like, oh my God, yes, you got to do this to the ice.